name is Sarah Bronin. I am a land use law professor and an architect, and I'm here to introduce this group that's come together over the last few months called Desegregate Connecticut. In just 5 weeks, we've assembled a broad coalition to speak together with one voice and to say, enough is enough. We must tackle discrimination and segregation at one of its most insidious sources, and that is our land use system and specifically zoning. Many of the people and organizations that are represented here today have been working on this issue for years. They have been fighting for choice and opportunity, for stronger cities and a more inclusive Connecticut. Right now, we all believe that working together, we can make tremendous change. Before I turn to the other speakers, I just wanted to say why this matters so much to me, personally. I grew up in the poorest neighborhood in Houston. It's called Gulfton. When I was about 1 year old, I was held up at gunpoint in my grandparents' submarine sandwich shop while I was in my mother's arms. Of course, I don't remember that, but it was one of several instances that changed my trajectory in my life. Fed up with the crime, my grandparents sold their shop. They moved out to a small town called Crosby outside of Houston. My parents worked 2 jobs, so they could not afford their own house in that same town. What we did instead was my whole family, my parents, my sister and I, crowded into one room of that house. My sister and I slept in a sleeping bag on the floor for years. We were, as far as I know, the only Mexican family in Crosby. Because I lived in that town and I slept on that floor, I got opportunities that were not going to be available to me in Gulfton. I got nature, I got safety, I got education that led to other opportunities. And that's why I'm here today. Now, I live in Hartford now. We have to improve life for people living in places like Gulfton, cities, and even some of our small towns. We have to make it easier for people to access opportunities. Together, this coalition has identified our top 10 specific, serious, data-driven reforms. They're all available on our website, desegregatect.org. We've earned tremendous support, including from those who have previously opposed these efforts. A full list is available on our website, but in addition to those organizations who are speaking today, other organizations include the Partnership for Strong Communities, LISC, Supportive Housing Works, the Regional Plan Association, Fairfield County Center for Housing Opportunities, Southside Institutions Neighborhood Alliance, the American Institute of Architects, the National Organization of Minority Architects, Advanced CT, the Connecticut Main Street Center, the Urban League of Southern Connecticut, the Center for Latino Progress and Transport Hartford Academy, the Connecticut Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, Connecticut Voices for Children, Connecticut Women's Education and Legal Fund, Education Reform Now, Preservation Connecticut, and by the way, any of the
Great. All right, there you go. Now you can hear me better. Preservation Connecticut, and I see some of the organization leaders. If you'd like to come up and step behind us, please feel free. Universal Healthcare Foundation of Connecticut, Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut, Urban Hope Refuge Church, and some local groups, Coalition for Westport, the Mansfield P&Z, and Old Saybrook March for Justice. So today you'll just hear from 3 of 30 of these organizations, but they'll all be telling you the same thing. If you're serious about Black and brown lives, if you're serious about income inequality, social inequality, and racial inequality, please join us in helping tear down the legal barriers that make Connecticut one of the most segregated states in the country. So with that, I'll introduce the Honorable Matt Ritter, the Majority Leader of the House. He has been a champion of these issues for years, and I will turn it right over to him.
Take this off so folks can hear me. I want to thank everybody, Senator Anwar and Senator McCory in particular, and Sarah, and all the advocates for your hard work. And I want to tell you what we're doing in the House and where I think we're going to go in the coming weeks, coming months, and coming years. But I also want to start with me, why this is such a personal story. I go back to the 1960s, and in Bloomfield, Connecticut, which is now one of the most diverse communities in our state, on 16 Applewood Road, At the time, it was all white families, and Bloomfield was vast majority white. I don't know if there were any African-American families in Bloomfield in 1960, but there were very few. And a woman named Patricia Ritter started the Connecticut Housing Investment Fund, which is still in Hartford today. And she went to 16 Applewood Drive, and she bought that house from a white family who was unwilling to sell it to an African-American family. That woman, Patricia Ritter, turned that deed over to Willie Myers, who became the first African-American to buy a house on Applewood Drive and one of the first in Bloomfield. Ladies and gentlemen, that was 60 years ago when my grandmother and my grandfather had to buy homes in Windsor, Bloomfield, and in Hartford in certain neighborhoods and sign deeds over to African-American families. 60 years ago. That is not a long time. So as Sarah mentioned, there's a ton of people behind us who have been doing the work, but this issue, unfortunately, still remains very complicated here in Connecticut. And the only way we're going to make real progress, and I say this to all probably like-minded people, is we have to persuade people who may not think like we do at this very moment. The coalition's got to be bigger than the folks behind us and the folks that continuously vote on these bills. 2 years ago, we override a veto from a Democratic governor amending 830G to make it more difficult to do projects. Let that sink in for a second. That was 3 years ago, not 60. So this work is real. So in the House, what I'm proud to say in the House is, led by Representative Rojas, who has been a strong advocate on these issues since he got first elected, Representative Lamar from New Haven, Representative McGee, the chair of our Housing Committee, and Representative McCarthy-Vahey, our chair of Planning Development, are drafting bills as we speak. Sarah, I know they've worked with your organization and the groups you have assembled here. I'm so glad to see CCM here and Joe. So we have that bill now. We're having conference calls. I have to sneak out. I apologize to another Zoom call here to talk about police accountability. But this bill is on our agenda. And it's not just next Thursday. It's not just September. It's not just next January. We have a lot of work to do. But I am so encouraged by the coalition that came together so quickly under your leadership, Sarah. Folks, we all agree on a lot of these issues. The charge is go find folks who are not so sure, who are not educated on the issue, and bring those, not only allies, we need those votes. Big difference. So we can put pen to paper. We got to pass bills in two chambers and get it signed by the executive branch. That is the trick. So I look forward to working with all of you over the coming weeks and months on these issues, and I appreciate your advocacy and the chance to speak today. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, and I know others in leadership, including Senator Duff and the Senate, sent their regards as well. Godspeed to your leadership meeting. Next up is Joe DeLong. As Representative Ritter might have alluded to, some of you may be surprised to see CCM here today. For years, they have been thought to say local control and walk away from the table. But I think it's clear with his presence here today that the municipalities will be at the table, and I really admire his leadership. I'm really glad that you're here, Joe, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank all of you for being here today. It's a pleasure to speak on such an important issue. As Sarah and Matt and others alluded to, our organization for years has really focused on local control, making sure that one size did not fit all, and things that frankly were probably a hindrance to some of these efforts. And after the horrific events happened with George Floyd, and there was a movement that was going across the country, we had one specific municipality that asked me to come and speak at one of their selectmen meetings. And the question that I got was, what can CCM offer to the municipality in terms of training and education and do from our members? And all those things are important, but one of the things that I said that day was, I think the first thing that CCM needs to do is reflect on ourselves and understand whether or not we're being a part of the solution or we're just being a quick path to no. And that's why we're here today. We have members all across the state that have mixed views on this issue. Some probably support every proposal in here. Some support some and not others. But the message that I want to deliver is, don't use us as a reason not to act. We want to be a part of the solution. We want to be at the table. We're very committed at working through these issues. And I want to say that as long as I'm here at CCM, our focus is not going to be on no. Our focus is going to be on making a difference and how we get to yes. And I look forward to being a part of that. So, thank you.
Next up, we have Cara Dodds, who is the treasurer of the Connecticut chapter of the American Planning Association. And she's been a leader both at the city level here in the city of Hartford. I had the pleasure of working with her, but also in a town. And she's going to be speaking today on behalf of the APA. Thank you, Cara.
Everyone. The Connecticut chapter is pleased to be here today with the American Institute of Architects, the National Organization of Minority Architects, and the broader Desegregate CT Coalition to ask the General Assembly to enact social justice reforms aimed at creating more equitable communities in Connecticut. The American Planning Association is a national organization of professional planners, land use attorneys, designers, and citizens committed to creating great communities for all. The Connecticut chapter and its 375 members are dedicated to advancing the practice of good planning in Connecticut by keeping our members current on advanced planning techniques and practices. One of the most essential of these practices is the exercise of our code of ethics. Planning and zoning is a very important part of our everyday lives. It affects where we live, where we work, and the access and availability we have to life's most essential elements, such as decent and quality housing, healthcare, economic advancement, healthy food, and quality education. As America acknowledges its challenges with systemic racism, planners too are grappling with their role as participants in this system. From its beginnings a century ago, zoning practice itself was used not only to separate incompatible land uses, but it was also used to segregate communities. This system created inequalities along racial and economic lines that are still very prevalent in our communities today. The time has come to stop perpetuating this system and to change the way we address social equity in planning. These practices have historically excluded certain populations from opportunities of economic advancement and wealth creation. In accordance with our code of ethics, we must seize this moment to urge change in policies and decision-making. The purpose of Desegregate CT aligns with our core values as planners, which are embodied in our ethical code. These core values call us to seek social justice through expanding choice and opportunity for all persons. They also call us to be consciously aware of the responsibility to plan for the needs of the disadvantaged and to encourage racial and economic integration. We see this initiative as an opportunity to start removing the structural barriers in our policies and regulations that have perpetuated systems of inequality in our communities. CCAPA supports the expansion and choice and opportunity of decent, affordable housing and greater diversity in housing types throughout the state. Additionally, we support zoning regulations that facilitate the creation of equitable communities and land use decision-making that is grounded in sound planning principles. We support efforts to ensure that the state does a better job planning at the highest levels and working with our communities to guarantee that they live up to their legal and moral obligations. We, CCAPA, look forward to assisting the legislature and our communities in Connecticut as we move forward on these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. So next, you'll be hearing from Jay Williams, the CEO and president of the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. As a former mayor, Jay has special insights into these issues. He had an award-winning vision for his community of Youngstown. And here in Hartford, he's engaged and our entire region creatively, looking at philanthropy, looking at creating opportunity, including through some of the organizations that are represented here today. So Jay?
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon. The Hartford Foundation for Public Giving is pleased to be and honored to be a part of the coalition of stakeholders who have gathered here today to move this issue forward. As has been referenced, there have been many who have been advocating for these policy changes for a very long time, and there have been some who have more recently joined as the entire nation turns a critical eye toward its own policies and institutions that for far too long have been rooted and influenced by the structural racism that has plagued this country. The Hartford Foundation continues to be committed to addressing these disparities in our region, disparities exacerbated by race, place, and income. Our residents and our partners have seen the long-term effects of exclusionary zoning practices on low-income communities, particularly on communities of people of color. We stand in full support of Desegregate CT's efforts that would make it easier to build new housing, to enable a greater variety of housing of all types, and to make decisions more fair and equitable and also efficient. These changes would benefit all the residents of the great state of Connecticut. We know, though, that these efforts need to be in addition to and in coordination with increased investment in our urban centers, including neighborhoods right here in the city of Hartford. Ultimately, all of these policy changes are about giving people choice, which is something that many of us take for granted. A family living here in the city, whether they work in our schools, restaurants, or stores, should have the choice to live in the community that they work or the community that they choose. Whether that's choosing to live in a neighborhood, a quality neighborhood in the city of Hartford, or in any of the neighborhoods in the wonderful and beautiful surrounding communities. That is a choice that they should have. It should not be abridged by their color, their ethnicity, their race, or their socio-income status, and certainly not because of exclusionary zoning practices. We urge the legislature to take up these reforms in a special session. With the death of George Floyd and the heightened sense amongst communities of the long-standing racial equity issues affecting this country, we are long past moving to action. We urge this now, and we thank you all for your continued support of this very important initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. So I'm going to turn it over now to Senator Doug McCrory, another person who has championed these issues for years and has been extremely passionate about them. Would you like to? I know you can say a few words.
Only Sarah could make me speak when I wasn't posted. I'll be very brief. If anyone doesn't really get it yet, I'm sure everyone around here and all the supporters get it. I'll suggest you read one book. And I get it because I lived in Hartford, grew up in Hartford all my life. And I remember when at one point my parents was thought about leaving and moving to a suburban community. I think I was about 11 or 12 years old. And we told them, no way. We want to stay here with our friends. But the reality was they were not going to be able to move to that community even if they wanted to because of some of the issues they have in Connecticut. So I suggest everyone just read The Color of Law. Just read the book and you'll understand how systematic these policies were, not just in Connecticut, but all throughout the United States. And they were done by government officials with government policies. So if we want to change them, it has to be changed by what? Government officials and changing government policies. And so some of the policies that this crew, this organization, all these people who have been working on, they address those policies that need to be changed. And I look forward to working on those policies in the legislative session, working on them in September, but more importantly, working on them in a special session. Thank you.
Okay, and now to a colleague in the Senate, Senator Anwar, who has really, again, as co-chair of the Housing Committee, for the General Assembly, has been a champion of these issues, and in particular, I'd like to thank him today for helping to arrange all of this. So thank you, Senator Anwar, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you each and every one of the advocates, organizations, individuals who have actually been able to advocate and raise the awareness of what needs to be done. We are blessed to have some legislative leaders with us as well. We had Representative Matt Ritter, we have Senator McCrory, who's my friend, and we have Mayor Bronin as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we have a number of other representatives and senators who are on board because, look, this is an issue which is not new to the state of Connecticut. This is an issue that a lot of people have been championing and working on and educating the larger population. But unfortunately, every time we bring up a bill which is going to address this, those bills die. And that is the reality. I've seen them die because we brought these issues in 2019. And we brought these issues in 2020 earlier, before this. These are not a reactive legislation. This is a proactive legislation because all of these things have been talked about. We have all heard about the challenges that our communities face in the state of Connecticut. Our state of Connecticut is one of the most segregated states in this region, where 50% of all African Americans and 50% of all Hispanic community live on 2% of the land of this state. You don't sustain a society that way. 2/3 of all African Americans and 2/3 of all Hispanic community members actually are in low opportunity areas. And their probability of coming out of the low opportunity areas into a high opportunity area is the lowest in the region. So, and housing is the center of all issues. If you are looking at a comprehensive social justice solution, doing just police reform is going to be symptomatic treatment. We need a therapeutic strategy, and the therapeutic strategy will have to undo the 400+ years of challenges and in the last many years of a strategic way that certain people sat in a room and made a decision to try and segregate our communities. And this is by design. And if it is by design, the design has to be fixed. And the design has to be fixed by the people, not in a room, but out here today together to stand up and say, no longer will we allow this. And for people who are not interested to do this for moral reasons, I say to them, do it for financial reasons. When you have about a quarter of your population is not able to participate and be effective workforce, how are you going to sustain yourself as a society? How are you going to sustain yourself as an economic engine of these communities and be able to compete with the rest of the country? This is something that needs to be done. It has been done and it has shown results, which has changed the future. A child from a low opportunity area, when they go to a high opportunity area, they are equal compared to anyone else. And that means that child could be our future scientists, solutions for all issues, whatever needs to be done. It is because of the policies and the lack of commitment that we have shown that is resulting that our children are not able to achieve their full potential. And therefore, it has to be done. I believe it's an emergency. I believe that this is part of the comprehensive strategy, and this is why we have a bill. And I have the draft document language, which will be available on my Senate webpage, so at least people can look at what we are talking about. It's simply in 3 broad categories. Category number 1 of what we need to achieve is to try and create infrastructure which is going to allow to make it easy to have diversity and in homes and increase the number of affordable homes. That's 1. Number 2 is identify ways to be able to increase and have policies which are going to make sure that there's diversity of the specific type of homes that we need in our towns. And the third one is to improve the processes. Processes is where it is getting killed. People will say that, oh, there are unintended consequences to passing any bill. Well, there are intended consequences of not passing a bill, and we are seeing that. And if you're going to tell me that the unintended consequences are worse than the intended consequences that you have of not doing anything, then we have to have a more detailed conversation about this. This is real. This is impacting our children. This is impacting our future. If we want to be competitive in the world, we have to wake up and give each and every one an opportunity. There is no shortcut to this. Enough is enough. And if we don't do this now, when will we do this? And if it's not going to be us, who will be doing this? Again, cannot do this alone. It's going to take a village and the entire community to come together to do this. And thank you, Sarah, for organizing part of this community. Thank you.
Okay, and one last speaker today, Pastor Johnson from Urban Hope Refuge Church, will be joining us for a few remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the First Lady of our city, Sarah Bronin. Thank you to all of our legislators that are here to talk, not only just talk about an issue that is just very prevalent in the neighborhood in which I serve as a pastor and as a community organizer with the Center for Leadership and Justice. But I think this conversation has been in a long time making, and I appreciate the steps towards solution. For most of you know, at the Center for Leadership and Justice, I am a community organizer, and I had the opportunity to organize around a neighborhood that I grew up in, organize around Barber Street, Northeast Hartford. And as I knocked on the many doors in the Clay Arsenal Renaissance Apartments and spoke with residents about their housing conditions, one thing that they wanted was to get out of those conditions. They didn't want to deal with mold. They didn't want to deal with asthma anymore. They didn't want to deal with these particular things. And so as an organizer, we looked at the power analysis and we saw that we had to remove a federal contract. So as the residents were getting prepared to fight the fight to remove federal contracts in their apartment building against their landlord, what we realized is that they had to be relocated. And so as we started to put a plan together for relocation for over 300 families, we realized some of them wanted to stay in Hartford, a city that I love. Some of them wanted to go to other places in other towns. So as we begin to work with the residents to go to some of the suburban towns that have so-called better education, that have what we call an opportunity zones, I think we call them. Simply, I forgot the correct term for them. We realized that when they tried to move into those suburban towns, that there were so many restrictions for them to move into those spaces. And we begin to look at it with a second eye, and we begin to realize that Connecticut is truly segregated for those who don't have the income to exist in spaces like Glastonbury, to exist in spaces like Farmington, to exist and to live in spaces like that. And so residents, when they had an opportunity to take their voucher, they couldn't go to the suburban towns because it was segregated. And so they were forced to move back into the same conditions that they were trying to leave because of laws and policies. And, you know, quite frankly, there is a level of racism in these spaces. So I am proud to support the coalition and proud to support the legislation that's being moved forward, because we have to desegregate Connecticut. If we want Connecticut and if we want our cities to thrive, we have to be open for people who don't look like us to live in these spaces. And I feel like I have the right to say that because I pastor a church where folks want to generationally move out of Hartford and to move into better spaces, but don't have the opportunity. So, Sarah Bronin, thank you for the good work that you're doing. Thank you to our legislature for picking up this fight, and I look forward to the success that will happen. Thank you, and God bless you.
Okay, so that concludes our prepared remarks. I'm sure none of you thought maybe a month ago that we'd be here on this beautiful day talking about zoning of all the issues that could be taken up. But as you can see, all of us here feel like now is the time. It's a structural issue. It's a long time coming for Connecticut. So there are many organizations that are represented here behind us, around, and I'm happy to connect you with those if you'd like to ask a specific organization more questions. But thank you so much for being here and for covering this issue.